The wind howls through the empty streets, pushing Sophie forward as she tightens her coat around herself. Her grandmother's woolen scarf, soft and familiar, clings to her neck, offering comfort against the biting cold. Snowflakes swirl in the air, settling on her hair as she walks the long path home. The park is nearly deserted, its trees standing bare and still. Sophie pulls the scarf closer, the familiar scent of her grandmother lingering faintly in the fabric. She's always loved this scarf, not just for its warmth but for what it represents, memories of someone who cared for her deeply. As she passes by the park benches, she notices a figure hunched over in the distance. Sophie slows her steps, her heart tugged by the sight of the woman sitting there, bundled in mismatched layers of tattered clothing, her frame visibly shaking from the cold. The woman's head is bowed, and her fingers, rough and thin, rub together in a futile attempt to create warmth. Sophie feels the familiar knot of empathy tighten in her chest. She hesitates, unsure at first, but then something pulls her forward. Her boots crunch through the snow as she approaches the bench. The woman doesn't look up at first, her eyes focused on the frozen ground in front of her, lost in a world of her own. Sophie stands still for a moment, trying to find the right words, but they don't come. Instead, she reaches for the scarf, gently unwinding it from her neck. "It's really cold out here," Sophie says, her voice soft and uncertain. The woman looks up slowly, her eyes catching Sophie's. They're hollow, tired, and yet they carry something else, something deeper, something that makes Sophie's breath catch for a second. She can't place it. Fear, maybe? Or sadness? The woman doesn't speak, but her gaze is enough. Sophie extends the scarf, her hands trembling slightly from the cold and the weight of the moment. "Here, take this. It'll help." The woman hesitates, looking at the scarf as if unsure whether to accept the gift. Finally, her hands reach out, fingers brushing the fabric, and she takes it. She pulls it close around her neck, her lips parting slightly as if to say something, but no words come. There's just a nod. A small, almost imperceptible nod, but enough to express gratitude. Sophie stands there for a second longer, unsure of what else to do. The silence between them feels thick, heavy with unspoken words. She wants to ask if the woman is okay, if she needs more help, but the look in the woman's eyes stops her. Something tells Sophie that this woman has seen more than she could ever understand, that maybe this scarf is all she can give right now. "I hope it helps," Sophie says quietly before turning to leave, her heart feeling strangely heavy. As she walks away, the absence of the scarf around her neck is stark, the cold biting through the gap where it once was. But there's also warmth in her chest, the kind that comes from knowing you've done something good, something meaningful. Still, something feels off. That look in the woman's eyes lingers in Sophie's mind, unsettling and hard to shake. By the time Sophie reaches her house, she's wrapped up in her thoughts. Her parents are there but distracted as usual, talking over each other about their day, hardly noticing when she walks through the door. She doesn't mention the woman or the scarf. Instead, she slips upstairs to her room, her mind still replaying the moment at the bench, the woman's hollow eyes, the weight of her silence. As she settles into bed, the room quiet around her, she feels a sense of fulfillment mixed with a strange sadness. She wonders where the woman is now, if the scarf is enough to keep her warm through the night. A part of her wants to go back, to check on her, but another part tells her it's not her place. She drifts off to sleep with the thought of that brief connection, wondering if she'll ever see the woman again, or if she'll always remain just a figure on a cold park bench. The next morning, Sophie is jolted awake by a loud, persistent knock at the door. Disoriented, she stumbles out of bed, rubbing her eyes. The knocking continues, more insistent this time. As she reaches the front door, still half asleep, she's not prepared for what's on the other side. 2 police officers standing stiffly on the porch. Confusion washes over her. "Can I help you?" she asks, her voice groggy. One of the officers holds up a photo. It's the scarf she gave to the homeless woman the night before. Sophie's stomach drops. "Do you recognize this?" the officer asks, his tone professional but pressing. Sophie nods slowly, her mind racing. "Yes. I gave it to a woman last night. In the park. The officers exchange a glance. Sophie's heart pounds in her chest, a cold, creeping dread settling over her. We're investigating a death, the other officer says. The woman you gave this scarf to, she was found in the park early this morning. She's passed away under suspicious circumstances. Sophie's breath catches. Dead? The woman from the bench is dead? She can barely process the words. Her simple act of kindness now feels tainted, as though her gesture had somehow played a part in this woman's tragic end. Suspicious circumstances? Sophie repeats, her voice shaky. She doesn't know what to say, how to respond to this sudden wave of dread that's consuming her. The officers explain that they're trying to piece together the woman's last hours, and they need to know about her interactions the previous night. You're not in trouble, one of them reassures, but Sophie barely hears him. Her mind is spinning. The scarf, how did it end up being part of this? Did she miss something last night? Was there more to that woman than she realized? They ask more questions. What time did she see the woman? How long did they interact? Did the woman seem off? Sophie answers mechanically, her mind caught on the image of the woman's hollow eyes, the weight of her silence, the scarf around her neck now tied to a lifeless body. The police leave, their notepads full, but Sophie can't shake the unease that lingers in the air after they're gone. She sits down, staring at the empty space where the officers stood, her thoughts a tangled mess of confusion and guilt. Her hands tremble slightly. It was just a scarf. It was supposed to help. Now, it feels like a mark, a connection to something dark and unresolved. Sophie tries to calm herself, but the thoughts keep coming. What if she had stayed longer? What if she'd done more? She recalls the way the woman's eyes had caught hers, the sadness, the fear. She should have asked more questions, should have done something, anything. Now it's too late. The house feels strangely silent, the ticking of the clock unbearably loud. Sophie paces, her mind playing out scenarios she can't control. What had happened after she left the woman? Was there someone else involved? The more she thinks about it, the more she's certain that this wasn't just a coincidence. The woman's death, the scarf, it was all connected, but how? Anxiety begins to coil tighter in her chest, her thoughts spiraling faster. What if the police think she knows something? Or worse, what if someone else thinks she does? She doesn't know why, but she suddenly feels like she's been drawn into something far bigger than she could have imagined. The weight of responsibility presses down on her. The image of the woman on that bench won't leave her mind, her hollow eyes staring back at Sophie even now. She had tried to help, tried to do something good, but instead, she feels as though she's stepped into a mystery that's swallowing her whole. Sophie lies in bed that night, unable to sleep. Every noise in the house makes her heart race. She feels restless, unsettled. The more she thinks about it, the more she's convinced that something was wrong from the start. There was something in the woman's eyes that night, something Sophie hadn't understood at the time. Now, it feels like a warning. Her mind keeps returning to the scarf, to the brief moment they shared. Was there more to that woman than she realized? Was her simple gesture of kindness a trigger for something far more sinister? Sophie doesn't have the answers, but she knows one thing: this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Sophie can't shake the feeling that something is horribly wrong. After the police visit, her mind fixates on the homeless woman. Who was she? Why had she ended up like that? Sophie's questions refuse to leave her alone. Determined to find answers, she returns to the park, retracing her steps to the bench where she had seen the woman. The park feels different now, darker, heavier, as if the brief encounter had permanently altered its atmosphere. She talks to a few regulars in the area, hoping someone might recognize the woman or know her story, but no one seems to have any information. Most people barely notice the homeless woman, treating her as just another nameless figure blending into the background of the city. It frustrates Sophie. How could someone just vanish from life like that? Her thoughts grow heavier with each day. Strange things start happening. Sophie notices people watching her, a man standing on the corner, another lingering outside her school. They never approach, but their presence is unsettling. She brushes it off at first, convincing herself it's just her paranoia after everything that's happened. But then, one evening, she comes home to find the front door ajar. Panic surges through her. She searches the house frantically, but nothing seems out of place. Nothing stolen, nothing touched. Yet the feeling that someone was there, that someone is watching her, becomes inescapable. The more Sophie thinks about it, the more convinced she becomes that this isn't random. Whoever these people are, they don't want her asking questions. Someone is trying to scare her off. But she can't stop now. There's something bigger at play, something that started the night she gave away that scarf. Desperate, Sophie starts examining the scarf in detail. Her hands trace over its familiar weave, but now she looks closer than she ever has. At first, it's just the simple, cozy wool she's always known. But then she notices something odd, something she'd never paid attention to before. Hidden within the intricate stitching are tiny symbols, barely visible, almost imperceptible to the naked eye. They're subtle, woven into the design so seamlessly that no one would notice unless they were looking for it. Her heart races as she stares at the scarf. What does this mean? The scarf isn't just a piece of sentimental fabric from her grandmother. It's more than that. It holds something secret, something important. A code, maybe? Some kind of message hidden in plain sight? Sophie's mind floods with possibilities. What had the homeless woman known? Was she trying to pass something along by accepting the scarf? The thought that her simple act of kindness might have tied her to something much larger, something dangerous, makes her chest tighten. She feels the weight of the mystery pressing down on her. The more she tries to unravel it, the more tangled it becomes. It's late one evening when Sophie is approached by a young detective named Daniel. She's suspicious at first. After all, the police had already questioned her, and she doesn't trust anyone at this point. But Daniel is different. He seems genuinely interested in finding out what happened to the homeless woman. He listens carefully, asking the kind of questions that make Sophie feel like he's not just doing his job, he cares about solving this. Daniel reveals something Sophie never expected. The homeless woman wasn't just a random person who had fallen through the cracks of society. She was once a famous musician, known for her incredible talent. Years ago, she had disappeared from the public eye after her life spiraled out of control due to addiction and personal tragedy. Her fall from grace had been sudden and devastating, and she had vanished completely, until Sophie found her on that bench. Sophie can hardly believe it. She thinks back to the woman's eyes. There had been something there, something broken yet knowing. How could she have been such an important person once, now reduced to nothing but a forgotten figure in the cold? Daniel thinks the scarf might hold the key to unlocking the mystery of her death. He explains that the symbol Sophie found in the scarf could be a code, something tied to the woman's past. Maybe she had uncovered something dangerous before her downfall, and someone had been trying to silence her ever since. The more Sophie learns, the more she realizes how deep this goes. Her decision to give away the scarf, a simple act of kindness, has now thrust her into a dangerous web of secrets. But she knows she can't back out now. The woman's death, the scarf, the people watching her, all of it is connected. And Sophie is determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. As Sophie and Daniel delve deeper into the mystery, the truth about the homeless woman begins to emerge with startling clarity. Her name was Elizabeth McCarthy, once a celebrated violinist known throughout the city for her talent and grace. Years ago, she had been at the peak of her career, performing in prestigious venues and surrounded by admiration. But then, she disappeared from the public eye, swallowed by scandal and personal tragedy. It was as if Elizabeth had vanished, leaving behind nothing but whispers and rumors. Sophie feels the weight of the name, Elizabeth McCarthy, a woman who had been so much more than a shadow on a park bench. Through Daniel's investigation, Sophie learns the darker side of Elizabeth's story. At the height of her fame, Elizabeth had crossed paths with a powerful political figure, a man who wielded significant influence over the city's elite. This man, though never named publicly, had been involved in several scandals that Elizabeth had stumbled upon. Rumors of corruption, blackmail, and illicit dealings had swirled around him, but nothing had ever stuck. Elizabeth, it turned out, had uncovered something damning, something that could have brought him down. But before she could speak out, her life unraveled. There were whispers of addiction, mental breakdowns, and erratic behavior that stained her public image. She was swiftly discredited, her career destroyed in what appeared to be a calculated takedown. Elizabeth had tried to expose the truth but was silenced before she could make any meaningful moves. That's when she disappeared from society, ending up on the streets, her legacy reduced to that of a forgotten soul. It becomes painfully clear to Sophie that Elizabeth wasn't just another victim of bad circumstances, she had been deliberately erased. The scarf, Sophie realizes, was more than just a cherished memento from Elizabeth's past life. As she and Daniel study the symbols woven into it, they begin to piece together a puzzle. The symbols are a code, a cipher that points to something crucial, something Elizabeth had hidden in plain sight. Sophie's heart races as they uncover what the scarf truly represents. It's not just a link to Elizabeth's former self, it's a map, leading to evidence Elizabeth had gathered in secret, something she had been trying to protect even as her world crumbled around her. With Daniel's help, Sophie tracks the code to a storage unit that Elizabeth had rented under a pseudonym. Inside, they find old notebooks, documents, and recordings, everything Elizabeth had collected about the man who had destroyed her life. It's a treasure trove of damning evidence, financial records, witness statements, and even audio tapes of conversations that reveal the extent of the corruption. But with this discovery, Sophie and Daniel also uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. The high-ranking official who orchestrated Elizabeth's downfall isn't just a corrupt politician. He's a man with deep ties to criminal networks, someone who has used his power to manipulate the legal system, intimidate witnesses, and eliminate anyone who threatens his control. Elizabeth had been one of those threats, and now Sophie and Daniel are too. As they dig deeper into the conspiracy, Sophie begins to notice the dangers closing in around her. The people watching her aren't just random strangers anymore, they're agents of the man at the center of this web, keeping tabs on her every move. Sophie realizes that the break-in at her house wasn't just a scare tactic. They're trying to retrieve the scarf and eliminate the trail Elizabeth left behind. The closer she gets to the truth, the more her life is at risk. The once simple scarf has become a symbol of something much larger, a key to unlocking a decades-long cover-up that could bring down one of the city's most powerful figures. Through the ordeal, Sophie begins to change. The naive girl who once believed in simple acts of kindness now sees the darker, more complex reality of the world. Her innocence is slowly stripped away as she confronts the corruption that runs deeper than she ever imagined. She feels an overwhelming sense of responsibility, not just to Elizabeth, but to herself. This isn't just about finding justice for a woman who was wronged, it's about standing up to the forces that try to silence the truth. Sophie can't walk away now. She's in too deep. For the first time, Sophie feels a fire within her, a determination that wasn't there before. The stakes are higher than ever, and she knows that there's no turning back. She carries the weight of Elizabeth's story on her shoulders, determined to see it through to the end. The woman who had once been invisible to the world, forgotten and discarded, deserves to have her truth told. Sophie resolves to expose the conspiracy, no matter the danger, no matter the cost. She won't let Elizabeth's legacy be one of silence. As Sophie prepares for what lies ahead, she realizes how much she's changed. The girl who had once simply wanted to help is now part of something far greater. She's no longer just a bystander in someone else's tragedy. She's a key player in a fight for justice. And she's ready to face whatever comes next. Sophie and Daniel know the stakes are higher than ever as they prepare for the final confrontation. Armed with the damning evidence they've uncovered, they decide to take a risk. The powerful figure behind Elizabeth's demise, a high-ranking official who has lived untouched by the law for years, won't go down without a fight. His network is vast. His reach extends into the very institutions meant to protect people like Sophie and Daniel. But this time, they have the truth on their side. Tension builds as they notice their every move being watched. There are moments when Sophie feels like she's being followed everywhere, whether it's on the street or even at home. The threats come in subtle but unmistakable ways, a shadowy car parked outside her house, anonymous messages on her phone, whispered warnings from strangers. But she and Daniel push forward. They know they're getting close. In a carefully planned move, Sophie and Daniel arrange to meet with a trusted journalist who has been investigating the corruption in the city for years. They believe that by making the evidence public, they can break the officials' iron grip on power. The scarf, now revealed to contain the hidden code, becomes the centerpiece of their proof. The evidence points directly to the officials' role in orchestrating Elizabeth's downfall. Financial records, conversations, and blackmail schemes all laid bare. The day of the confrontation arrives, and it's not without its dangers. The official, realizing the noose is tightening around him, sends men to intimidate and silence Sophie and Daniel once and for all. There's a close call, but they manage to evade the threats, narrowly avoiding a last-ditch attempt to prevent the truth from coming out. Sophie feels the weight of Elizabeth's life on her shoulders, knowing that if they fail now, everything the woman had suffered through would have been for nothing. But they don't fail. In a dramatic public revelation, the evidence is laid out before the public. The official is named and shamed, his ties to criminal activities exposed for the world to see. The city is shocked by the depth of the corruption that had been lurking beneath its surface, hidden in plain sight. The evidence Sophie and Daniel present is undeniable, and within days the man is arrested. The press runs with the story, and Elizabeth's name is splashed across the headlines, this time, not as a tragic footnote, but as a woman who had tried to stand up for the truth and paid the ultimate price. Justice is served, but it comes with a bittersweet feeling for Sophie. The man responsible for Elizabeth's downfall is finally brought to justice, but the cost had been too high. Elizabeth's life, her career, and her dignity had been stolen long before the truth was revealed. Yet, in her death, Elizabeth had managed to reach across time, her story now serving as a reminder of the courage it took to stand up to the powerful. She becomes a posthumous symbol of resistance, her legacy restored. The city honors her memory in public ceremonies, and her name is cleared of the scandal that once engulfed it. For Sophie, the journey leaves her changed. The scarf, once a simple family heirloom, has taken on a new meaning. It's no longer just a keepsake from her grandmother, it's a symbol of how deeply interconnected people's lives can be, even across generations, and how small acts of kindness can ripple outward in unexpected ways. Sophie never could have imagined that giving away a scarf on a cold winter night would unravel such a dark, complex web of secrets. Now, as she sits by her window, the chill of winter still lingering in the air, Sophie reflects on everything that's happened. She's no longer the girl who believed the world was simple, that kindness was always met with positivity. She's seen firsthand the complexity of the world, how corruption can thrive in the shadows, and how people can be forgotten so easily. But she's also learned something else, that even in the face of overwhelming darkness, individual actions can matter. Her simple gesture, that moment of empathy, had set off a chain of events that led to justice for a woman who had been silenced. Sophie's worldview has shifted. She understands now that change doesn't come easily, and sometimes, it takes everything you have just to expose the truth. But she also knows that it's worth it, that even the smallest action can have a ripple effect, touching lives in ways you may never understand. The scarf, now back in her possession, carries the weight of all that has transpired. It's no longer just an object, it's a reminder of everything she's learned. As she ties a new scarf around her neck, one she's made herself, in honor of Elizabeth, Sophie looks out the window. The air is cold and crisp, the sky a pale blue as snow begins to fall lightly outside. She knows she'll never be the same, but she's at peace with that. The world is more complicated than she once thought, but she's no longer afraid of its complexity. She understands the power of a single act, the way threads of fate can weave people's lives together, even in the most unexpected ways. And with that, Sophie steps outside, ready to face the world anew.